What's up, everyone? I am here today with an impromptu episode of Hot Talk, and we are going to talk about Pfizer, Project Veritas, and Jordon Trishton Walker, who is the supposed director of worldwide R&D strategic operations and mRNA scientific planning at Pfizer, at least as of a couple days ago. I have no doubt he has likely already been fired. If you're familiar with this channel, you know that I like to talk about sneakers, cars, really anything that interests me, but I'm not afraid to talk about the subjects that matter deeply the most to me. You've seen that with my In Defense of Ye. You've seen that with my Zadeh Kicks stories. And this one is right up my alley because it caught my attention yesterday evening, and I live sort of in the world of biotech. I'm very familiar with the space and a lot of what's happening in terms of innovation. I invest there actively. And this is a story that is not just a biotech news story, but a worldwide public health news story. Project Veritas broke some undercover footage of Jordon Trishton Walker basically saying some incredibly disturbing things if in fact they represent the position of Pfizer. Some examples which you can find in the videos posted by Project Veritas are, well, one of the things we're exploring is like, why don't we just mutate it ourselves so we could preemptively develop new vaccines, right? So we have to do that. If we're gonna do that though, there's a risk of, like, as you can imagine, no one wants to be having a pharma company mutating expletive viruses. You have to be like very controlled to make sure that this virus that you mutate doesn't create something like, you know, goes everywhere. Which I suspect is the way that the virus started in Wuhan, to be honest. Like, it makes no sense that this virus popped out of nowhere. This is fascinating to me in part because throughout the video, Jordon brings up the words gain of function and directed evolution with respect to working with viruses. And in fact, for those who are concerned about directed evolution, you should know the industry as a whole is actively currently using directed evolution to gain function for adeno-associated viruses to deliver novel gene therapies to areas that before now were unaddressable. And a great example of this is the central nervous system, CNS, basically neurons in your brain. AAV9 is sort of the standard for getting there, and it's just not very good. There are companies like Voyager Therapeutics who purportedly have 100-fold better tropism to the desired cell type using directed evolution processes to modify these viruses. Now, I am familiar with this and I am not concerned by it because it uses adeno-associated viruses which don't actually carry a malicious payload, so to speak, and don't replicate on their own. In the context of modifying a COVID virus, in the wake of a pandemic that has killed millions of people, this is callous. When I first saw the video, my reaction was that this was so groundbreaking because it was basically saying Pfizer was creating mutations to release so that they could then create the corresponding vaccines, basically the type of stuff you've seen in Mission Impossible by an evil supervillain. That is not, in fact, what is actually being advertised here. This is a stream of consciousness, by the way, and I'm gonna say a lot, so just bear with me. I've got a lot going on in my head, and I want to actually make it clear that at the moment, I'm just trying to piece the puzzle together. And that's one thing that I think I want everyone out there to think about and consider and take a step back is, there is a source of information, there are people who are trying to combat that source of information, and then there's the rest of us who just are trying to make sense of it, and you don't need to pick a side from the start. It's okay to be patient, it's okay to let the story develop, it's okay to want to learn more about the story, and that's why I'm making this video, because quite honestly, it's very telling that in a world where tens of millions of people watched the initial release, the general media has been completely silent on this, to the point that I'm the one giving this information. Like, that's kind of a joke, and it's kind of telling as to what's going on here, and in my opinion, it's telling of Pfizer's ability to control the narrative and their reputation. I don't necessarily know that what this employee has advertised is true, and if it is true, I'm not surprised that it would be the way a corporation would think. I think the intent is that Pfizer would explore in a controlled setting mutations to the virus that might occur to mimic nature, except under an accelerated process, so that they could then front run a vaccine if and when the mutation actually made its way out into the real world, not through them. And it's not so far-fetched to believe that they might do this because there is a lot of money on the line. They are not the only company trying to sell a vaccine. There are tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions at stake. And so it's entirely plausible to my mind that Pfizer might want to do this. And in fact, if it were legally allowed by law, I would almost expect them to. I don't even know that I would consider that bad science. It might be good science, if not incredibly dangerous science. And in fact, potentially the way the virus got out the first time. But more concerning for me is the way that this employee, Jordon Trishton Walker, was nonchalantly talking about this as if the ethics of the situation don't matter, as if the patient doesn't matter, as if all that matters is money into Pfizer's pocket and to Pfizer's bottom line. And that's an attitude that is clearly carried and represented by this particular individual, which gets to my next point, which is I have invested in a lot of pharma companies. I have walked away from some which I believe have people at the top that lack integrity, and I have seen examples of others who I believe have the utmost integrity. I do not know the ethics or integrity or values that the CEO of Pfizer, I believe Albert Bourla, carries. I can imagine that dealing with this mess is a big problem for him, but I don't know if it's a good old boys club at Pfizer or if in fact this individual is just off the reservation. And I think that's really important to keep in mind here as we go forward. This person, to my eyes, is a questionable source. That doesn't mean he's untrustworthy. It just means you probably should take what he has to say with a grain of salt and try to see the bigger picture and play for yourself. There are some things that he said that I think are absolutely true, and they're so easily validatable and verifiable as to be completely transparent, but we as a society just ignore it. As an example, he said, because if the regulators who review our drugs, you know that once they stop being a regulator, they want to go work for the company, they're not going to be as harsh on the company where they're getting the job. Well, look what happened to the former commissioner of the FDA, Scott Gottlieb. He is now on the board of directors at Pfizer. It's so obvious to see the potential quid pro quo there that I don't even think it needs to be discussed further. You can look at that and you can easily draw your own conclusions. As a neutral party going into this, as with all things when it comes to me, I try to find ground truth, because ground truth is what's going to hold up over time, not a narrative to one side or the other. And when you're investing with your real money, that's what matters. This is not a story I can invest in, but I wear the same hat and I've tried to find ground truth. And so I see the video from Project Veritas. To me, it's very disturbing, and I want to find out, is it legitimate? So questions that came to my mind immediately. Was this person, Jordon Trishton Walker, a real Pfizer employee with the title that he was purported to have held? And this story has only gotten more and more fascinating since it broke last night, because one thing I try to do is look at counterpoints. And on Twitter, there is a person, George Webb, who tried to discredit this story by Project Veritas as a journalistic Hindenburg. And he said that Jordon Trishton Walker did go to Yale, but he was a prankster, and he was a urologist, and so there's no way he actually held the position at Pfizer of this import or that title. It's incredibly telling that the very next day, upon further research, this very person that tried to discredit this as a journalistic Hindenburg has come around to acknowledging that, in fact, Jordon Trishton Walker was an employee, a director at Pfizer since 2021, and the justification now is he must have been junior. Well, look at how far we've come. If the side that's trying to discredit the story now has to acknowledge its merit, that to me is a sign that this story has legs. It gets better or more interesting. This afternoon, Project Veritas released a new video confronting Jordon Trishton Walker about what he said and revealing that he was caught on tape saying the things he said, and he completely lost it. It was like someone who had just been caught in a web of lies, put in a cage, fight or flight instinct, react in any way you can to try to save or salvage the situation. One thing he said was very interesting, and it is probably the most concerning element of what's in play. He said he lied. He thought he was on a date and he was misrepresenting the facts or what he was claiming to try to impress the other party. I have seen and met people who, for whatever reason, as I said, are just off the reservation. Their behavior cannot be explained, cannot be endorsed. I don't know if he's an instance of this, but the lies that he would be making up to try to impress another party don't seem very impressive. They seem kind of absurd and odd, and again, just the presentation of the attitude, of the lack of consideration for the situation you're speaking of empathy for those who have lost their lives as a result of this pandemic, to be so cavalier is embarrassing. And that mindset, that attitude, that is honestly what I found the most disturbing thing to be about this video. And in addition to that, the elements of what he said, as I said, with respect to directed evolution of viruses, to me, they absolutely have plausibility. And so the fact that someone who works at the company would say this out loud means it could be plausible, to my mind. Now, again, I don't need to draw a solid conclusion one way or the other to tell you that I'm highly interested and invested in the outcome of this story, and I want to follow it. And I find it fascinating, another element of this, that the mainstream media is completely silent, that Pfizer has not responded, that I need to go to Twitter, of all places, for all of the stuff that's happened with Elon Musk and with Twitter, where people were bashing Twitter. I'm going to Twitter to get my information as a highly educated, well-paid Silicon Valley resident. What does that tell you about the state of our society? What does that tell you about Pfizer's ability to control their reputation given what's just taken place? It's highly, highly concerning for me. Positive notes, current developments. A Senator Ron Johnson has called on Congress to investigate. Marco Rubio has written a letter of inquiry. I was in the Twitter spaces both yesterday and today for a period of time, and Congressman Matt Gaetz spoke for a bit. So this does have the attention of our elected officials. I don't know what, if anything, will actually come to pass. I can tell you that I will continue to watch this story closely, and I would love to hear from you out there what you think about what's taken place. It's just honestly so surreal, and again, To me, this shouldn't be about me versus you without having all of the facts on the ground. It should be about trying to uncover the truth. And there's a point about Project Veritas that I want to make that I found very interesting as well, which is that a lot of people that I interact with in the biotech world heard that Project Veritas was the source and immediately discredited it without looking into the information at all. There are Wikipedia pages discrediting Project Veritas. The Google search results basically said, question the source. Well, I'll tell you, I personally am not familiar with Project Veritas. I'm not familiar with the investigative journalism they've done before. I looked at this story on its own merit, and as it has unfolded, to my eyes, it is legitimate. It is a legitimate Pfizer employee who said legitimately disturbing things. Does that represent the company? I don't know. That's an open question. But the investigative journalism, the investigative reporting, I don't believe has misrepresented this situation. And those, as I said, who have tried to discredit it have ended up having to backtrack on their statements. And so, for the time being, I would like to wish James O'Keefe and Project Veritas congrats on breaking a very fascinating story, and I am very interested to see where this goes. To me, figuring out ground truth in an open and objective way is what America should be all about. That's why I'm putting this out there. So if you like what you see, let me know. If you've got comments about this, let me know. Comments, questions. I really want this to be engaging because I feel like I am in an information vacuum. That's all I've got. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned if you want to see further updates on this subject, and I will see you at the next video soon.